in-laws are trying to make my wedding theirs, and it turned into a circus. Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. I want to apologize in advance if this gets a bit long, but I promise it'll be worth it. There's a lot to unpack here, so bear with me. What I'm about to share happened last December, but it's taken months for everything to settle. I needed a clear head before I could sit down and write it all out, so here goes. My wedding day was, apart from the drama I'm about to recount, absolutely magical. I married the love of my life, surrounded by family and friends. In the wedding, we had poured our hearts into planning. It should have been a day of perfect happiness, and in many ways it was. Yet, if it hadn't been my wedding, if it had been someone else's story, I might have found humor in the absurdity, but it wasn't. I was at the center of what felt like a reality show that spiraled completely out of control. I suppose the best place to start is with some context because, honestly, this situation didn't develop out of nowhere. My partner's parents had an unconventional relationship with their children, one that was hard to fully grasp until I became part of the family. You see, they never really had a traditional wedding of their own. They got married in a courthouse under somewhat rushed circumstances. His mom was already pregnant with his older sibling, so they decided to keep things low-key. Not that there's anything wrong with that, of course. But they were young, broke, and focused on practicality over ceremony. They had dreamed of doing a big event later on. Maybe a vow renewal, yet life had other plans. Before long, they had a house full of children. 8, to be exact. A vow renewal or real wedding fell to the wayside as they raised a large family and prioritized other things. Whenever they recounted their wedding story, it was always a mix of fondness and humor. They'd laugh and shrug it off, saying they wouldn't have changed a thing. According to them, it was one of the happiest days of their lives. But none of us, especially not my partner and I, realized just how deeply their lack of a real wedding might have simmered beneath the surface, and how, in a turn of events that I still have a hard time comprehending, this buried resentment would explode in a spectacularly inappropriate way on our big day. I had always kept a cautious distance with my mother-in-law and father-in-law. We never quite meshed, and while I didn't mind some differences, there was something a little too intense about their relationship with their children. It wasn't quite unhealthy, but close enough to be unsettling at times. They held a bizarre standard that no one was ever good enough for their kids. When discussing their children's relationships, they'd casually throw out strange phrases like, "If I were dating you, I wouldn't be," or "Why can't you date someone more like me?" It was uncomfortable and occasionally even a little creepy, but the family had learned to overlook it. My partner was, thankfully, down to earth and not influenced by their overbearing attitudes. He rolled his eyes at their remarks, brushing them off. For him, their comments were just a family quirk he'd grown up with. For me, though, being newer to the family dynamic, it was a bit more challenging, but as long as they didn't interfere too much, I could manage. I'd let the little things go and focused on the positives. My love for my partner being far greater than any small discomforts they brought to the table. Then my partner proposed, and it was one of the happiest days of my life. He planned it perfectly. Just the two of us in one of our favorite mountain spots, with our dogs, the sky open and endless above us. I was thrilled beyond words and, of course, burst into tears of joy. It was deeply personal, intimate, and meaningful to us both. He hadn't told anyone about his plans except my mom and my best friend, keeping the moment truly ours. The following Friday, he shared the news with his family during dinner, and that's when the first hint of trouble began. I'll never forget the look on his mom's face. She was livid. It was the kind of fury you don't expect from a parent upon hearing their child is happily engaged. She made no effort to conceal her anger, and I was shocked. I could understand some level of disappointment, perhaps wishing she'd been informed early, but this was something else entirely. She went on about how she felt she deserved to be there for the proposal, as much as I did. It was an odd statement, as though she felt entitled to a role that was solely mine. Then she said something that truly stunned me. She, too, wanted to be proposed to. When I asked her what she meant, thinking maybe she was joking, she explained. She believed I should formally propose to her, asking her to be my mother-in-law. It was such a bizarre idea that at first I didn't know what to say. I told her as gently as I could that it was a little unconventional and, honestly, a bit silly. This was a proposal between me and my partner. It wasn't a family event that included a second proposal to his mother. My lighthearted dismissal clearly didn't sit well with her. She stormed out of the room, leaving an awkward silence in her wake. We never spoke of the incident again, but a strange tension remained. It was like there was this underlying resentment that she couldn't quite let go. As the months went on, we set our wedding date for December. With each passing week, the tension between us and his parents only seemed to intensify. Every time we saw them, they would throw out little comments, hints of their displeasure with the way we were planning our day. They'd talk about their dream wedding, describing it in vivid detail as though they were about to start planning it. They dreamed of a tropical paradise wedding with bright colors, palm trees, piña coladas, and the whole 9 yards. My partner and I didn't have anything against a beach wedding, but it simply wasn't us. We loved the cold, the mountains, and the beauty of winter landscapes. For us, the idea of a snowy December wedding was perfect. Each time they'd mention their dream wedding, we would smile politely, nod, and move on. We thought it was just harmless talk from two retired people who'd spent too much time watching wedding shows on television. We never imagined these little comments were actually hints of what was to come. Then came the bridal appointments. Thinking it would be a lovely bonding experience, I invited my mother-in-law and sister-in-law along with my friends to help me choose a wedding dress. I thought it might be a step towards easing the tension between us, a way for her to feel included and appreciated. I truly wanted her to be part of the process, to share in the joy of the preparation. I had no idea it would turn into one of the most stressful outings of my life. Everything started out fine. I tried on a few dresses, and we had some laughs. I began to feel a glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, we could all get along. That hope vanished quickly. I soon heard giggles from across the store. I looked over, only to see my mother-in-law and sister-in-law acting suspiciously, disappearing behind racks of dresses. I asked my friend to investigate, and she returned with a horrified look on her face. Apparently, they had found a storage room and were stuffing it with the dresses I had tried on and loved, replacing them with brightly colored, non-traditional options. These dresses weren't just unsuitable. They looked like they belonged at a prom rather than a wedding. The level of audacity was hard to fathom. I approached them, hoping to understand their motives. They smiled sweetly, claiming that they were doing it for my own good. According to them, I would look ridiculous in a long white gown, especially since they still believed the wedding would be on a beach. They seemed convinced that they knew what was best for my wedding, even though they had been told repeatedly about the location and theme we had chosen. I corrected them, explaining once more that it was a winter wedding, not a beachside affair. They rolled their eyes and muttered something about lost potential, then strolled away as if they hadn't just crossed a huge line. Later, my partner took them along to the cake tasting, trying to give them another chance to be involved in the plan. I think he hoped it might help smooth things over, but he returned, visibly annoyed, saying they had tried to pressure him into choosing a pineapple-flavored cake, decorated with Hawaiian flowers. He firmly said no, moving on without giving them any room for negotiation. Reflecting back on all these moments, it seems absurd that we didn't see the signs sooner. The months rolled by, and our December wedding date steadily approached. As the time drew near, we found ourselves spending more time around my partner's family, which brought with it a steady stream of helpful comments from his parents. Every time we saw them, they'd bring up some brilliant wedding idea they had seen on television or heard about from friends, always tied to their vision of a tropical paradise wedding. Their dream was as clear as ever: a beach ceremony, palm trees swaying, piña coladas in hand, and vibrant flowers everywhere. It was as if they had mentally planned their own dream wedding for years, and now that we were planning ours, they thought they'd finally have a chance to bring it to life. Through us, my partner and I loved the cold and winter landscapes. Our vision for a winter wonderland was what felt meaningful to us, symbolizing our bond and the cozy memories we cherish. Yet, each time we sat with them, the in-laws would innocently slip in a few beach wedding suggestions. I smiled and nodded, thinking this was just idle chatter from retired parents who had watched one too many episodes of reality wedding shows. Maybe they were even living vicariously through us, picturing a different version of the day they had never had. I didn't see it as harmful at the time, just a bit annoying. It wasn't until we were in the midst of wedding planning that I realized how serious they were. When the time came for me to go wedding dress shopping, I decided it would be a nice gesture to include my future mother-in-law and sister-in-law in the experience. I thought this might be a way to bring us closer, to bridge that slight divide between. Looking back, I wish I had trusted my gut, because what was supposed to be a lovely bonding experience turned out to be a chaotic preview of the drama that was to come. The dress shopping began smoothly enough. I tried on a few dresses and even found some that I absolutely adored, envisioning myself walking down the aisle in them. I had my friends with me, offering supportive feedback and excitement. At one point, I started to feel that flicker of joy that comes when you think you found the one, the dress that feels like it was meant. But then, out of nowhere, I heard a strange, familiar giggling from the other side of the store. It was my mother-in-law and sister-in-law, and they were up to something. Curious, I asked one of my friends to check on them. When she returned, she looked completely bewildered. Apparently, they had gone around the store, collecting all the dresses I had tried on and liked, hiding them in a back storage room that I hadn't even known existed. In place of the elegant gowns I'd chosen, they were hauling out brightly colored, overly embellished dresses that looked like they belonged at a prom or maybe a costume party. Each dress they picked seemed to be more flamboyant than the last, with loud patterns and an explosion of colors that screamed, "Tropical!" When I confronted them, they insisted they were only trying to help me avoid a huge mistake. According to them, it would be utterly embarrassing if I wore a traditional, floor-length white gown to a beach wedding. I couldn't believe they were still convinced that we were getting married on the beach. Calmly, I reminded them yet again that we were having a winter wedding in a snowy field with a chilly December backdrop. My mother-in-law simply rolled her eyes, muttering something about wasted potential, and then they sauntered off, apparently deciding that I was beyond help. My partner, trying to keep the peace, decided to include them in the cake tasting, hoping they would feel more involved. However, the moment they arrived, they started insisting on a pineapple-flavored cake adorned with bright Hawaiian flowers. They brought along photos of cakes decked out with exotic fruit and floral arrangements, clearly prepared to make their case. My partner politely declined, saying we'd already chosen a flavor that suited us, but they seemed unbothered. They continued, tossing out one tropical idea after another, completely ignoring the fact that neither of us wanted a beach-themed wedding. In hindsight, it was almost as if they were planning their own wedding, oblivious to the reality that this was our day, not theirs. There were countless small incidents like these over the following months, yet somehow we brushed each one aside. Maybe it was wishful thinking, or maybe we were simply too focused on our vision of the day to truly comprehend the depths of their meddling. We thought, foolishly, that these little annoyances would be the end of it. Finally, the day arrived. Snow had softly covered the ground, blanketing the world in a serene white layer that turned our chosen field into a beautiful winter wonderland. I could feel the chill through the air, my breath coming out in small clouds as I took in the enchanting landscape. Despite all the chaos in the lead-up, the day felt like a dream. I was about to marry the love of my life in the setting that meant so much to us. As the guests started arriving, dressed in cozy, elegant, neutral-toned winter wear, I felt a surge of happiness and relief. My partner and I were tucked away in a small room, putting the final touches on our outfits and preparing for the ceremony, when my maid of honor burst through the door, her face a mixture of disbelief and exasperation. She held her phone up, showing us a FaceTime video. One of my bridesmaids outside had decided to give us a preview of the spectacle unfolding. On the screen, amidst a crowd of guests dressed in warm, muted tones, my mother-in-law stood out like a beacon. She was wearing a bright red, knee-length Hawaiian dress, complete with an oversized sun hat, looking ready for a beach party rather than a winter wedding. Standing beside her was my father-in-law, dressed in matching tropical attire, as if they had fully embraced the theme they had tried so hard to impose on us. Their outfits clashed so violently with the surroundings that I couldn't help but feel both horrified and slightly amused. The surrealness of the moment was almost too much. I wanted to go out there, to confront them directly, but my friends convinced me to stay put, assuring me they'd handle it. I watched as my bridesmaids approached them, asking if they could perhaps change or at least tone down their attire. My mother-in-law responded with complete nonchalance, claiming that they had been told it was a tropical wedding. And besides, she said with a smug smile, the wedding needed some color, as she believed we'd done it wrong by choosing such a dull theme. The bridesmaids pleaded with her to consider changing, explaining that everyone else had dressed according to the winter theme, but she was steadfast. She insisted her outfit was exactly what the wedding needed, adding that she was actually doing me a favor by bringing some life to the setting. Realizing that arguing would only escalate things, I told my friends to let it go, figuring it wasn't worth the scene she seemed so eager to cause. The ceremony itself went off with minimal interruptions, or so I thought. I was utterly absorbed in the moment, standing before my partner, the vows and promises filling the cold December air, surrounded by the snowy landscape that felt like something out of a dream. But as I would find out later, my in-laws were doing their best to steal the spotlight, even before I set foot down the aisle. Apparently, before I walked out, my mother-in-law had decided she would make her own entrance. Somehow, she had found a bouquet, a mix of random flowers that no one could quite identify, and was determined to have her moment. She even approached the organist and requested the wedding march to accompany her down the aisle, hoping, it seemed, that guests would mistake her for the bride. When the organist refused, she had no choice but to sit down, though not without loudly proclaiming her displeasure. It was almost laughable, the length she was going to in order to insert herself into our day. But I was none the wiser as I prepared to make my own walk down the aisle, blissfully unaware of the small battle that had just been waged. While I stood at the altar with my partner, another struggle was quietly unfolding nearby. My father-in-law was determined to position himself right beside my husband, as though he were the one about to exchange vows. He kept sidling closer, leaning in, shuffling until he was practically nudging my partner out of place. My husband's best man had to gently but firmly steer him back to his seat multiple times, though each time he would shoot my partner a wounded look as if he couldn't fathom why he wasn't allowed to stand there. And it didn't stop there. As I walked down the aisle, both my mother-in-law and father-in-law continued their disruptive commentary, openly voicing their disapproval of everything they saw. My dress, apparently, was too plain. My makeup was too much. The decorations, meticulously chosen to fit our Winter Wonderland theme, were met with scoffs and dismissive remarks about how the entire ceremony lacked color. They seemed oblivious to the fact that people could hear them, or perhaps they simply didn't care. Every so often someone would shush them, which only seemed to fuel their irritation further. Then we reached the part of the ceremony that we had tailored to our liking, removing the line that traditionally asks if anyone objects to the marriage. We saw it as an outdated and unnecessary formality, but my in-laws, of course, took it personally. Right there in the middle of the vows, they loudly asked if I was really that insecure that I had to cut out the objections. My heart sank, mortified. But before I could respond, my partner stepped in. He looked right at them and, in a tone that brooked no argument, told them it had been his idea and that they should shut up. For once, they were speechless, silenced by his rare outburst. After that, the ceremony continued without incident. Felt a rush of relief as we were pronounced married, and we made our way down the aisle hand in hand, the whole world seeming to fall away in that joyful moment. We walked out together, feeling as though nothing could dampen the euphoria of finally being married. But as soon as we stepped outside, the in-laws were at it again. They immediately demanded that we give them the car that had just married painted on the back, insisting that we owed them this gesture. My partner's face darkened, and without a word, he slammed the car door, leaving them standing there, shocked, as we drove off to the reception. Arriving at the reception venue, I felt hopeful that the worst was behind us. We settled into our seats, ready to soak in the celebration with friends and family, but it didn't take long for the in-laws to make their next move. They were the first ones to approach us, walking right up to our table with their usual overbearing smile. Without so much as a congratulations, they demanded that we give up our seats to them. Apparently, since we'd had the ceremony all to ourselves, it was only fair that they got to preside over the reception. "Don't worry," my mother-in-law said with a condescending smile. "We'll still take it, even though you messed up the tropical theme." My jaw dropped, and before I could fully process what was happening, my husband's face turned stormy. He started to respond, but thankfully one of his brothers stepped in and led his parents away, sparing us another argument. We managed to enjoy the meal, though it was clear they were waiting for another chance to jump in. Each time they tried to approach our table, one of my bridesmaids or a friend would intercept them, offering them some kind of distraction to keep them at bay. But the moment our first dance was announced, they saw another opportunity. As my husband and I moved onto the dance floor, lost in the music and the joy of the moment, we became aware of two figures on the edge of the dance floor. Glancing over, I saw them, my in-laws, slowly swaying, attempting to inch their way into the literal spotlight. They were bumping into guests, stepping on toes, awkwardly navigating their way into our first dance. They looked completely ridiculous, but they were dead set on being part of the moment. Once again, friends intervened, gently guiding them back. But the sheer persistence was exhausting, and my husband's frustration was visibly mounting. Throughout the evening, they continued to disrupt in subtle but infuriating ways. They tried to pull the photographers aside, demanding wedding photos of themselves. When the photographers politely declined, pointing out that they were not the ones getting married, my in-laws looked outraged. And then came the cake incident, a stunt that was the final straw. While mingling with guests, one of the waitstaff discreetly informed us that they had caught my in-laws trying to replace our wedding cake with the pineapple-filled cake they had wanted all along. They had somehow smuggled the other cake into the venue, ready to switch it out at the last moment. When my husband found out, his patience reached its limit. He stormed over, caught them red-handed with the cake, and without a word, escorted them out of the venue. The taxi that had been parked outside was hailed, and without hesitation, he ushered them into it. They protested, insisting that we had ruined their special day. But he didn't waver. He shut the door on their complaints and watched as the taxi drove off, finally rid of them. Returning to the reception, he was greeted with cheers from our friends and family, who had witnessed the chaos unfold and were relieved to see us finally take control of the day. For the first time since the ceremony, I could fully relax, knowing that my in-laws were no longer there to disrupt our night. After my in-laws were taken away by the police, it was like a cloud had lifted from our wedding. With them out of the picture, the evening transformed. The air was filled with laughter, music, and the warmth of friends and family who were genuinely there to celebrate our love. I was able to put my veil back on, thankfully it hadn't been damaged in the tussle, and laugh at the absurdity of the situation. For the first time that night, I could fully breathe, knowing the worst was behind us. The rest of the reception went smoothly, and we were finally able to relax and revel in the celebration we had planned for so long. My husband and I shared our first dance, uninterrupted this time, and we laughed and danced until our feet ached. The night ended beautifully, with our friends and family showering us with well wishes as we headed off to start our lives together. It felt like a fairy tale ending after an evening that could have easily been a nightmare. But as blissful as that night turned out, the saga with my in-laws was far from over. At first, my husband and I hoped the ordeal was behind us. We had been through enough with them and were eager to start our lives in peace. But the honeymoon phase was barely underway when my in-laws started their campaign of retaliation. It began subtly enough. Anonymous calls at odd hours, missed voicemails filled with mumbles and hang-ups, and packages left on our doorstep with strange notes. They escalated quickly, becoming more invasive and aggressive. A few weeks after the wedding, we started noticing a bizarre trend. Pieces of wedding cake were being left outside our house. At first, I thought it was a joke, maybe a prank from a friend who knew about the wedding drama. But it became more frequent, to the point that we'd find slices of cake smeared on our porch, on our windows, and even on our car. The mess was always accompanied by angry notes, alluding to how we had ruined their special day and deprived them of their dream wedding. Though they never signed the notes, the handwriting was all too familiar. My husband was furious, and after a few incidents, he convinced me that it was time to take action. We reached out to a lawyer who advised us to document everything, from the notes and cake attacks to the phone calls and unwanted visits. The in-laws even went as far as showing up at our house, unannounced multiple times, demanding that we make things right and apologize for destroying what they felt should have been their day as much as ours. They were relentless, each visit more unhinged than the last. 2 months after our wedding, enough was enough. My husband was adamant, and I agreed. It was time to pursue legal action. We filed charges for harassment and sought a restraining order. It was heartbreaking, as we both wanted to maintain some semblance of family harmony, but their behavior had made that impossible. The restraining order wasn't something we took lightly, but it became a necessary step to protect our peace and sanity. Our decision to press charges sent a shockwave through the family. Many had been unaware of just how unhinged my in-laws' behavior had been at the wedding, and hearing the full story left them appalled. As the details unfolded, the family's sympathy quickly shifted, and most began to distance themselves from my in-laws. Over time, their social circle dwindled, and it was clear that their fixation on the lost wedding had isolated them. Since then, life has been much calmer. With the restraining order in place, they are legally barred from contacting us, and the peace that followed was both surprising and wonderful. We settled into our lives, finally free from the constant stress and interference that had colored the early days of our marriage. It wasn't easy letting go of the lingering resentment, but we focused on the love we shared and the strength we had found in facing this adversity together. In a strange way, the ordeal brought us closer, solidifying our commitment and showing us that we could handle whatever life threw our way. Our friends and family rallied around us, offering support and reassurance, and we built a community of love and understanding that continues to grow.